mess it all up.
Preparing.
All right, we're live. Makes it easy. Now it's probably going to kick up on you there, Will, and you're going to have to like exit out because it's like you might be able to hear us talk, but mess it all up.
I think we're good. I also think that we lost TJ. Poor guy.
Always.
He'll be back in a second. Well, while we wait for TJ, how about we have our distinguished guest with all the data? How about you introduce to the Hold My Beer crew?
Jason, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, I wasn't sure who was going to go first. So, hey, welcome everybody.
I did a really poor job leading up to that by not using your name.
Yeah, well, hey, it happens. So I'm Jason Miller, everybody. I'm a professor here at Michigan State University in the Supply Chain Management Department.
I love it. I'm a big fan. TJ makes fun of me because I'm a nerd and I love this stuff. But I also went to Purdue, so boiler up.
Oh, you know what?
Oh man, that's a low blow right there, Tony.
That stings. Too soon, Tony.
It's still fresh, man. I'm ripping the Band-Aid off.
Oh, that hurt.
Well, hey, sorry about that. I literally, I don't know what happened. That thing popped up, said we were live, and I hit the X, and it like kicked me out. But yeah, so it's great to have you on, Jason. Honestly, nobody really knows who Tony Darnell is. So, guys, Tony Darnell is on with us today. And is that a buffalo or a bison behind you?
That's a bison. I'm out in the field, man.
Are you? You're out in the field. No. You got some pellets. But yeah, and then there's Will with a fake picture behind him, photoshopped on there. He actually played lacrosse.
The very real picture.
Indiana Wesleyan. That's all that liberal arts degrees. There's lacrosse out there, right?
Illinois Wesleyan. We do now have lacrosse, but if you look close enough, you can see that man's helmet's gone. So we did a good job.
Holy smokes.
No, they couldn't afford straps.
No.
So anyway, looking at a lot of stuff, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going around. We even had a show on it, with the ports and everything that's going on supply chain wise. And I think, as people dig in and start seeing that stuff and watching it, and I think just like anything, really, they're looking like, is this true? Or is this actually what, people are saying this, they're saying that, they're looking for things. And, out of nowhere, we're all here networking, trying to grow our business and whatnot. Here's Jason posting these things. And I see a lot of people that I know in the industry that commenting on it. And, I'm working to come up with content and, really, and think of things that can get people engaged and whatnot. And he's posting graphs and data, and he's got 34 comments and all these reactions. So it goes to show that there is a balance. And hey, some people like to hear somebody talk about it or get an idea of it. But some people actually want to know, let's look at some data. Let's look at what's actually going on with what we're seeing, because there's problem solvers out there that want to solve the problems and truly just don't know how. And sometimes it's not their fault. It's just the fact that the access to that information and that data just isn't there. So for me, this was huge. I'm always loving to learn and grow out. But Jason, give us a little background on yourself too. What got you into this, where you're at now, and where you see yourself kind of going with it, and even, I guess, background where you're at now, and then your involvement and what you kind of see, maybe even the future of the supply chain here going forward.
Yeah, so I guess my background a little bit. So I was, it's going to sound weird being at Michigan State, but I was an Ohio State PhD, kind of did my dissertation and whatnot on the trucking sector. My dad was a driver in the 80s. He worked for International. My granddad was an engineer for International Harvester. So I've grown up around, really the sector. And so it kind of stayed into it. And then once I got to Michigan State, he was a doctoral student at the time, or doctoral candidate. His name is Bill Muir. He's in the Air Force, one of the smartest guys I've ever met. But he had an econ background, and he really kind of got me to think about a lot of the government data. And for his dissertation, he did a lot with the trucking sector and pulling a lot of the different government data sources in. And that kind of got me thinking, okay, well, maybe I can use this for research purposes. So this is pre-COVID, 2018-ish. I started getting, a lot of exposure to these different data sets. But I was only doing it for research. I didn't really think anything of, communicating this beyond, okay, I'm just going to go teach some of this content. And then really sort of once COVID hit, it sort of the recognition that it seemed that there was just this thirst for data out there, right? People wanted to know what was going on. And I sort of realized like, okay, I mean, for lack of a better term, we're all trying to keep from going insane, right? In March of last year. Stuck at home and thought, well, I've got a lot of this material in kind of my lecture slides. Why don't I just start putting some of it on LinkedIn just to see if there's any interest whatsoever. And also it's going to force me to sort of broaden out and focus on different topics. And sort of one thing led to another. And in January of this year, I'd done a project with the Army Corps of Engineers as it pertained to vaccine distribution to understand, okay, what are, potentially some of the issues there. And it forced me to get even more exposure to different government data sources. And that's kind of just morphed into, for me, trying to put something out, 3-4 days a week to really just get people thinking about, okay, what is the government saying right now? What are the statistics saying, whether it's trucking employment or imports or producer prices, but trying to be as objective as I can be, because I don't have a dog in this fight right now. And so that for me is the biggest thing, is just trying to put out that information. Hey, here's what I see. Here's my thoughts on it. Some cases people agree, some cases they'll vehemently disagree, but really trying to have a way we can have a good conversation on some of these topics, and a civil conversation, because I mean, that's so difficult anymore, unfortunately.
And it's I think it makes it easier to have a civil conversation when there's facts sitting right there in front of you. It's not a bunch of opinions being thrown around it. And you can have opinions on facts on the data, but it's still like logical, based off of what you're seeing.
Yeah, I always like to think of it as, it's like once you have data in front of you, if we're all willing to accept that, hey, maybe the Bureau of Labor Statistics, since they've been collecting employment data for 80 years, they may actually know what they're doing. I mean, I'm going to take a hunch after 80 years, they'd have a pretty good knowledge of this. If we can agree that their data is likely highly valid, you're at least constrained in the conversational points you can have. It becomes difficult to say, well, we need 200,000 truck drivers, when you can say, but we're only down 20,000 in over the road general freight. Becomes hard to make these sort of, I'd say, very extreme claims when it's not consistent with the data.
That's what Tony said the other day, that there's been more CDLs and authorities issued this year than any other year. Am I wrong? Is that what you said?
There was some sort of, I saw a graph, so I questioned it because it wasn't Jason's, but I saw a graph that had, it was this dramatic rise, this pie chart, or I'm sorry, this like a histogram graph of.
Hang on 1 second, Tony. I got to interrupt you. Will, do you know there's a giant Molo sign covering me on the live feed right now?
No,
that was awesome.
That's hilarious.
Dude,
I think that's epic.
like, I can't get to it, but yeah, there's a huge Molo water park on the thing. I think it's in your Zoom settings you have to go to, but it's all good. I mean, I don't have the best looking mug in the world anyways, but
that's fine. I'd rather look at Molo.
We're just giving the people what they want.
Yeah, the purple, what is that? That looks like the United Healthcare sign. What is that?
It's a Molo heart.
What is Molo? What is a Molo?
That's for modern logistics. It's amazing.
You can't make people guess. All right, go ahead.
Anyway, so this graph showed the steady flow of DOT authorities issued, and then 2020 and 2021, they were so incredibly skewed. It was insane. And the only place that those new authorities were going to get drivers from was from CDLs. And there was another graph unrelated on a different post. Somebody was showing about the number of new CDL entrants to the driver pool. And it was like hundreds of thousands. And I don't know, I don't recall the actual data. I just remember the graphs itself. But do you have any of that info, Jason? Is this something that somebody just threw together, or can you validate that?
So I cannot validate the CDL part, but what I can give is something very consistent actually with both of these stories, and that the Census Bureau tracks new business applications through requests to the IRS through EIN numbers. And so that's a very good figure for that. since essentially about June of 2020, in transportation and warehousing, pre-COVID, we saw about 20,000 applications a month. Now we're at over 40,000. So it's doubled, which is very consistent with those charts you're seeing with the operating authority requests. Now, the one thing I'd always say is if we were seeing 20,000 requests a month previously, that probably is telling us that there's not going to be 20,000 new trucking companies. There's a lot of EIN requests that go nowhere. Probably the majority of EIN requests go nowhere for actually creating a new company. I bet you the majority of operating authority requests actually go nowhere to a power unit actually getting added and hauling freight. But what I would say to think about is if it's double what it was previously, then we probably are seeing double the rate of new entrants. Whatever that was previously. So I think that that's one, you can't look at the series and the levels, but we can say, okay, whatever the ratio is of, pre-COVID, there'd be about 1,000 new trucking companies go active every quarter based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics data that is actually tracking employment at establishments that are paying FICA taxes. So like this is as legit of a number as you can get. We're now at over 2,700 entered in Q1 of this year. And so that's about 2 times where we were before. So I think right now we are seeing the most entrepreneurship in trucking that we've seen in essentially the history of any of the data series that we have going back.
So that validates the graph that I saw, at least partially anyways. But the only skew to that graph is you have to encompass that with new CDL issuance from the states. Because if these people are just driving truck for a company and then go out and buy a truck because they realize they can make so much more money for the other 3 jobs of mechanic, AP, and compliance, AR and compliance, then maybe some of them will find that it's worth it, but maybe they won't. But there's not really any new capacity added at that point. You're just moving from company to OO. And is there any kind of data that would so I think that the trucking driver shortage problem thing is really a myth. I think there's a lot of people entering the market, but I think there's a lot of people retiring or exiting. I just think there's more entering than exiting. I think our capacity is growing rapidly.
Well, the thing is things are getting a little more efficient, right? And easier for people to get in. It used to be an art back in the day, right? I mean, like you really had to take it seriously. So, hey, you're seeing service levels kind of drop too, not only because of the demand in freight, but because of the types of drivers that are getting in, but then the methodology around it and, the reasoning. But, I always thought the same thing. It's like driver shortage. I mean, you're seeing such an increase in just in freight in general. On top of the fact, you can't buy a truck. You can't find a truck anywhere. So if you can't find a truck because there's no trucks available, how are we on a driver shortage? Trucking companies want to make money, man. They can't even keep up. And so
they're putting the yard ornaments back on the road too.
Right. And people have CDLs for, like you said, from other, whether it's company or whatever, and then they go to the owner operator card. That happens. And a lot of them apply for authorities before they even buy a truck because they're not going to buy a truck unless they can get one. And some of them are applying for a second one. Some are applying for a one because their other one got turned off, which you got to look into when you vet carriers. But there's all those reasons. Jason mentioned some other ones. But yeah, if you can't buy a truck, I kept thinking, like, how are we have a driver shortage? We're not just buying trucks and letting them sit.
I can tell you one thing. We lease our equipment from the Penske, which has been a great partner. But we ordered a truck in like January, just took delivery of it yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, I can vouch for that. You can't buy a truck. I ordered a trailer in November of 20, and it's November of 21. It's not here yet.
And I had an owner op that used to run for me in my fleet, and he was like looking at getting a new truck. He's doing well, and he's like, I'm gonna he's like, call me. He's like, hey, don't get all worried or anything. If you see my truck, because he was like a friend on Facebook, he added me. He's like, but I'm gonna see like what I can get for this thing. So if you see it posted, it's not because I'm leaving or selling or whatever. I said, all right, cool. So he's like, dude, I had to take it down. He had it up for like 10 hours, his used truck. And he's like, just got absolutely blown up with people that wanted to buy it. And they were like bidding up, like way above, like, just like the housing market now, way above what you listed at. And so if that's the case, man, there's people that want to drive, right?
Well, and so I think, tying this in, I'm going to basically put like three or four additional ideas to build on that. One is, given the price of used equipment right now and how high this is getting, to me, that does really raise a concern. What happens when this market turns and rates start going down? Because it is going to happen right now. I mean, we will see that in 22.
Are we in a trucking bubble?
Well, and this is why I'm posing the idea is that if folks are paying well above market value for used vehicles, what happens when the spot market does turn? I mean, right now, it just feels that given where output is, given where that we do see employment going up, so capacity has to be coming back. You can't help but start wonder, could we start seeing in 2022, let's say the second half of the year, if the market really starts cooling, what are these companies going to do that paid way too much for their trucks? So I think that that's one thing to keep in mind.
Well,
On the shortages,
we found out in
ahead.
08 what the housing market did when we had easy money that was cheap, and we gave a bunch of
And that's-
questionable lenders houses
That's not a
at
theory
way
either.
overpriced.
That's not a
Right,
theory.
yeah, I mean-
That's truth. I mean, that's I said it. So one thing that got me when we first started on that Mad Game show, Tony, remember back when the rate debate there, when the COVID shutdown first started, and all these truckers and carriers were bitching and complaining, and everybody's like, oh, like don't. And I was like one of the few that were like, hey, this is just part of it. It's a cycle. In 2018, when that freight boom happened, people were just going out buying trucks and getting in them because there were such good rates. And then they were making money and they weren't taking care of their business and they weren't preparing. They were operators, but not owners, right? And so, and their business was not prepared for anything like this to go down. They didn't have the strategies, the relationships, the holdings, all those things that you need to make it through. And they're like, oh, there's so many companies going out of business, out of business, and some were legitimate, but a lot of them were based on that and the fact that the market gets saturated, just like you said, Jason. Those rates go down; they always will. It always does. And all of a sudden now it's what we were complaining about rates, we're complaining about this and that. Well, you know what? Somebody's still paying out there. But you were out on the spot market on the free board, right, making all that good money. And then when it goes back to what it most likely probably should be, you can't make it. Am I wrong there?
No, I think one of the best indicators, if we're looking at recent history, would be Q1 of 2014, where there was a polar vortex across the country, and essentially the same thing happened. So you saw a lot of people that were driving for the large national carriers go and become owner ops of their own. They get equipment, they start hauling off the spot board, and rates were fairly elevated for all of 2014. And then it took until probably end of Q2 2015 for things to start to slow down. And 2016 was unbelievably low. Levels were unbelievably low. And you saw a lot of carriers exit the market because they were chasing freight on the spot boards. They had no developed relationships with shippers that could sustain their business. And they were not necessarily sound from the business fundamental standpoint. And so, the big carriers that have been doing it for a while, they're not impacted. Then they go and scoop up owner ops that were running their own shop before. But, this time, the only thing that's much different about, I was actually talking about this with one of my reps today, is that I don't see when the timing is going to work as it did last time in terms of being able to forecast when the market slows down. It probably levels off, right? Where we say this is a new normal. If it's elevated above, 2020, and now these are the new normal rates, that's probably the case. But I was in Long Beach 2 weeks ago, and I've never seen so many ships just sitting waiting, right? And as soon as they get unloaded, those containers are going back to get loaded again, right? And so the supply piece, the demand piece for goods has got to slow down as well if we're going to expect to see any type of decrease in rates. I think it starts to become a new normal. But Jason, I'd love to get your idea on that.
Well, no, I was going to build on what you said, Will, and I think this is the one thing that's very key about this market now that is distinct from the past. Typically, let's take 18. Demand was basically just up across the board, right? We had about a 4 or 5% increase in demand on a ton mile basis in 18 from 17, which is a really big increase. You have to go back to pre-Great Recession to see something like that. But it was across the board. What we're running into now is there's certain lanes that have just silly high volumes in comparison to what they used to have. So take again right now, Chicago or Los Angeles to Chicago. Because of imports, I'd be willing to bet you're looking at volume that's 15, 20% higher than pre-COVID. we've never had a freight market take a shock like that. And think about how difficult it is to actually have a big influx of capacity that wants to haul Los Angeles to Chicago, right? A lot of trucking capacity is regionalized. You know, one of the local carriers up here in Michigan that serves Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, they aren't going to position a truck in Southern California. That's never going to happen. And so I think we're going to have, the reason this market has been so elevated and it's been for such a long time is because we have these certain sort of key lanes of freight that are so out of whack. It is going to take a very, very, very long time to bring balance to that from a supply side, which means really, I think, Will, this was building on your point. It's going to have to be the demand dropping that will bring normalcy to the market on these specific lanes. That's distinct from what we've seen in the past, which was always, it just took supply to catch up. So I think that probably, little technically econ stuff, but I think that's something we have to keep in mind for why this cycle is so different than the 17, 18, 19.
And the biggest thing is that I think a lot of this cycle has to do with that. Like if you look at one bucket of water, so that LA to Chicago, that's a huge intermodal lane. I mean, and when you can't, when rail can't handle it, and that was a year and a half, 2 years ago, they decided they couldn't even handle it anymore. Obviously trucking then ramps up. And so this is almost like that effect where, that bucket of water is full, intermodal's at a full capacity, that starts spilling over. Right. And then it's that, whatever the cheapest, whether it's LTL now, right now, LTL is consolidating a full truckload, a lot of it, because they can't, 5 days late's on time. Right. Tony, you know about that. And, or an expedited LTL, or even just a straight truck or something. All these things that are the efficient, easiest, cheapest way are now overflowing into others. And then those are overflowing. So for that all to get back to normal, it's not just a spike and a down. I mean, it's like that's all got to flow back to, because processes are being changed and, things are changing. You could put more trucks on the road, but you can't put more rail cars on a track. I mean, like you can't, unless you build a track next to it. There's just no way to do that. And so those things like that, you start to see how pulling one leg out from this supply chain and how it all depends on each other and how it has for so long, that when you pull one leg out because of COVID and how that all affected it and everything else, is talk about COVID economy, all that stuff, jobs. And then it doesn't take much, you start yanking on those other legs. And before you could yank on those and it would affect it a little bit. But now, I mean, huge effects, right? I mean, you're seeing a big change just with, if there's a flood, or, I mean, you have a winter, like, a bad winter or something like that, it could be huge. And those little things just keep knocking it back, I think, as we see them.
I blame Harley Davidson's just-in-time inventory back in the 80s.
And Domino's 30 minutes or it's free. I mean, those things like set the bar too high. I told you that before the show. But I mean, you see what I'm saying, Jason? Like, that's what I always talk about. Like when you spread something thin enough, right? When you pull a rubber band thin enough, the smallest touch to it sends a ripple throughout the whole thing. But when it's not, it doesn't. But I think when you pull that supply chain that thin, it just takes the smallest things to continue to knock it back.
No, I would agree with that. And I think that, that is what makes this cycle unique. I mean, we did get some good news today. Was Union Pacific and BNSF just announced they're no longer metering inland intermodal traffic. Their facilities in Chicago and Dallas and whatnot have gotten cleaned out enough. They're going to be upping intermodal volume again. So that's a huge improvement as we're going to be thinking about relieving some of that stress on the trucking side. But I mean, really, to me, it's until we start to see the mixture of freight getting more back towards pre-COVID levels, that's what's really going to change things more than anything. Because I mean, we still are dealing with a dynamic where manufacturing output is still not back to pre-COVID levels, but retail, wholesale, warehousing activity is way above pre-COVID levels. And carriers are still working to find that balance of, how do I build a balanced freight network?
What sectors of manufacturing aren't up to pre-COVID levels? Because I'm not arguing with you. I would like to know the data, because I know a lot of the segments are way past. Like our output where I work, we're an OEM supplier to boat, RV, commercial vehicles all across, and we've probably doubled or tripled output since before COVID.
Yeah. So, and that doesn't surprise me given how consumer spending shifted, but motor vehicle production
Yep.
down from COVID due to the chip shortage. That and
not,
that,
not only chip shortage, but also the even during that, how long those plants were down. I mean, we were with a lot of those, not even just with the chip shortages, right? They were down for quite a while during or after that initial shutdown and didn't know when they were going to come back up, just because of all that. And hey, unions, government assistance, they were allowed to do those things. You know what I mean? And some of these places just can't do that, but keep going. Sorry. You're right.
No, and I'll just give you an example. This is from some research we're working on now. Michigan was the worst hit state by the shutdowns. We lost 26% of trucking jobs in April of 2020 from April of 2019. 26% of trucking employment went away. Why? Because we lost 43% of essentially our manufacturing employment disappeared with that shutdown. So auto's not back. Furniture manufacturing is still below pre-COVID levels. Paper manufacturing, which actually requires a lot of freight, paper is still down several percent from pre-COVID levels. Right now, food production is actually down a little bit. And ironically, of the overall, every manufacturing sector, food production is the biggest one that actually contributes to trucking ton mileage. So when you combine in quite a few of those sectors not being back to pre-COVID levels, you end up having less manufacturing output for freight than we had even in 18 and 19.
That's really good data. I appreciate that. I wasn't questioning you at all. Don't get me the wrong idea there. I was just, I wanted to know the dive in on the details, because I know steel is up, manufactured housing, RV, boats, commercial vehicles. There's a ton of sub segments that are booming that I mean, I thought food was up, honestly. I mean, more people are going out everywhere you go, but there's a lot of restaurants that are closed, and the capacity there because there's not workers, there's shortages in labor everywhere. What do you think, in your opinion, what do you think some of the keys are, some of the outside influences are? Like, I know the unemployment bonus thing kind of ended or something, didn't it? I mean, are those the kind of factors that are playing a part in this, in your opinion, or what? Is there something else?
So at least on the research we're doing right now on understanding state level trucking employment, the unemployment incentives had nothing to do with it. Actually, the states that rebounded the most rapidly for trucking employment, holding constant a bunch of things, actually had better unemployment benefits. So you can rule that certainly is not affecting the trucking side. I think right now, so much of the shortfall of workers, it goes back to that entrepreneurship discussion. We're seeing record EIN number requests across the board. It's not just transportation, it's every sector. I think a lot of people are reevaluating their lives after COVID, and they're saying, I want to try to be my own boss. And I think one of the challenges right now is people have, startup money. They're trying to go out and maybe make their own living. And it's going to take some of them perhaps not succeeding and coming back into the labor force is, I think, part of the picture. I think that we've framed so much of this argument as it's the incentives keeping people from working, but I'm just not sure the data is going to be there to support it. We actually will planning on taking a look at that. There's some ways we can basically compare, a county that is just next to a county in a different state. This state kept benefits, this state didn't. Did that result in a change? That's the strongest test we can do. I don't think we'll see anything. I really think that a lot of people are trying to, put up their own shingle right now. And I think that that's one reason that companies are having a hard time in some sectors actually finding folks.
Is that like, is there data to say what segment that's coming from? Because I can see where that would be the case, not in trucking because it pays better than unemployment, even with the bonus, but maybe in retail or fast food, that's not the case because it might, I had a guy one time, this is an anecdotal story, but I had a guy one time that did the math and he said, I'm not going to come back to work and work 40 hours for $200 more than I'll make sitting at home on unemployment. And I said, it blew my mind that mentality was out there because of it being an entry level or a lower skill set job that just doesn't have a huge financial reward for the level of employment that it is. If that segment was affected, but overall the segment isn't, because like trucking, where it pays typically, especially in this environment, a lot better than something like a drive-through worker or retail. Is that data parsed out like that?
So I actually literally was just logging in right now to the Census Bureau to get some of those data. So right now, just to give a sense, pre-COVID, each month overall for businesses, there was about ballpark at 290,000 EIN number requests. We're now at 450,000. So we've seen the requests for, new EIN numbers to start companies, it's doubled. So and that's across the board. I think a lot of people are looking at switching sectors. I was just talking actually with one of my good friends today, John Carroll, Ali Dackner, and we were talking actually about studying this potentially, because I think that there's data out there that can be used to look at that from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I just think a lot of people are looking at switching sectors, and I think especially for low paid, jobs like fast food that are very unrewarding, I think a lot of people want to try something else. And if that doesn't work, maybe they go back to that. But I think really, to me, the question is, I understand employers, complaining about it and saying we can't find workers, but complaining doesn't help. It's like, as a faculty member complaining your students aren't studying hard enough. Well, you've got to take some responsibility yourself to say, okay, what is it? What are the levers that I can pull that can help me address this? And I think a lot of employers really do need to reevaluate, what are you offering? Offering somebody $12 an hour anymore, it's just not going to cut it. Nobody wants to work for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just wanted your input on that, because I really feel like, and again, this is not data driven, this is my emotional, anecdotal, what I've seen, experience, and I really feel like the better paying jobs, there's a huge demand, and the pay is going up due to some of these inflationary causes of free money, easy money.
So on the inflationary side, I certainly agree that I think we've been potentially, the third round of stimulus was, I think in some ways, a nightmare for the, for the retail sector, or for the import supply chain, I should say, because you could tell March hits, people just go start spending money like crazy, right? Like you see retail sales blow up to levels that we've never seen. So, I think that certainly has contributed. Used car prices, or, prices of cars at dealers' lots. A lot of that, I'll be honest, is dealers gouging. We can see that in the data that I was just checking yesterday, that as of October of this year, the average gross margin that a car dealer is clearing per motor vehicle sale is up 37% from before COVID. And before you had seen, like over that time period, like a 3-4% increase. So profit per car is up 37% that they're selling.
Wow.
Yeah.
Will?
That's insane. If I were to report that our gross margins were up 37%, it would be problematic. That's insane.
Hey, I'm here, guys. Sorry, I lost my video there. I got to go through my mobile feed here. But no, the other thing is too, and just from, and I think Will, you ran into this too, what you guys were just talking about. And I may have came in, you guys may have moved on here because I was trying to get my tech together here. But when you look at the lack of people getting into, like you guys said, fulfilling those restaurant jobs, or the fast food jobs, or the lower wages, because a lot of the low wage jobs that like we offer in logistics are way up, like it's starting salaries. The starting salaries now, because recruiting's so hard to get people, like to find people, that they're offering way more money. So when somebody maybe would have been on the border of like, well, I can make like a little bit more to go to a logistics company, but I don't know anything about it, or I could work here, or they may choose that instead. But now it's like, well, I'll take the extra whatever. I'll go into something I don't really know much about, because it's paying $20,000 more a year, because it's offered more. So I think that was one big thing that plays a role in that too. I think, I don't know if you guys agree, but.
I don't know. I think there's a lot to be said about it. Jason made a good point earlier just around people learning a lot during COVID. I had a conversation a moment ago, and this is not necessarily related to freight, but it could be to an extent. You've got people that are learning a little bit more about flexibility and work-life balance and how that all plays into what they want their life to be. And one of my reps was like, man, I'm sitting here spending time with my daughter, and she's probably, she's a couple months old. So she goes to sleep really early and then she wakes up like late, right? So if you're like commuting to and from an office that's an hour from you, like your kid might be asleep when you get home and not awake when you leave, right? So like people are seeing the flexibility that work from home and different setups allow. And so, yeah, maybe that creates a more entrepreneurial spirit for someone to want to do something outside of the scope of what they were doing before.
But just learning technology in general. When you're forced to, before when, my mom or dad, I ain't doing the internet thing. You guys get on the whole internet. Well, now for them to see their kids for a while, they had to figure out how to download Zoom, or they had to figure out how to get Wi-Fi, right? Or they had to figure out how to do this or that. And I think that feeds into what you're saying, Will, is that now they're saying, hey, there's another way to do this. There's other ways to make money.
Totally.
Yeah, I still haven't figured out much of this. So, Jason, do you have any data? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Will.
No, I was going to say, so when you look at the data that you're looking at on a weekly basis, what is something that you consider to be a hot take, right? Something that you're looking at right now and you're like, man, people may not be paying attention to this, but it's going to be a ripple down effect just by looking at the data, something that maybe we should pause and take a look at.
Oh boy, that's a good one. I guess sort of right now, I was just checking the other day, because talking inflationary pressure and people typically focus on, finished goods and whatnot. But the one thing I was sort of seeing is, the transitory natures. If you look at the price increases we're seeing right now for processed goods that are still going into finished products, but then the unprocessed goods, so oil, food stocks, things like that, they're up very much too. I mean, I think it was unprocessed goods for intermediate demand. That's the actual term. I can't make that up. That's actually what the Bureau of Labor Statistics calls it. Those products were up 8.4% in October from September. And that's when I look and I'm like, okay, is inflation transitory? Right now, it's certainly not. It's going to take a while for this process to work itself out. And so if there'd be anything I was looking at, I'm like, ooh, that doesn't look good. That would be the one statistic that came to mind is if you've got the raw materials going up that much, that's going to eventually cascade down. There's no way you can get around that.
So, is that telling us let me start over. So when you see an 8% increase in raw material for a manufacturer, let's say, across the board, just a generic increase from everything coming in, like taxes that are levied on businesses, they don't actually pay that money. That is going to be passed along to the customer, to whoever's buying whatever they're making. And the price will go up probably 10% to cover the 8% and the cost of the adjustment.
How does that ripple through everything, Tony? Look at the housing market. When lumber,
right.
When you look at raw materials, right, wood, things like that, all of a sudden now, contractors building can't do it. Now to buy a house, it's even more. That just keeps going more and more.
Yeah,
and I've got a buddy that's in the bulk industry, and the bulk industry moving, everything from dried cement to salt and everything. That's coming from Morocco. That's coming from, all the organic corn and shit coming from India. We don't really grow organic corn here because the amount of cost it takes to grow organic corn without having cheap labor, you got to get it overseas. And when the boats aren't moving, I call them boats, the ships aren't moving, and they weren't for a while. Hey, lack of raw material, but increased demand.
Yeah, my brother-in-law builds these decks, custom decks in these houses in the Chicago suburb, and a $7,000 or $8,000 deck before pre-COVID is like 25 now. Literally, it's gone up that much because lumber went up, labor went up, every aspect of building get transportation, gas, all of these costs that just keep going up. He's not paying his people more or making less, those margins are always still in there in business. And maybe unlike used cars, it's probably the same margins that they were getting pre-COVID, but their cost went up. Their labor cost went up, the material cost went up, the driving to and from work went up. So to be able to keep people building decks and to be able to buy the lumber to keep building the decks to stay in business, even just to make the same margin you were making pre-COVID, the price has gone up like 2.5, 3 times.
No, and this
and
is
that's
right.
forced too. I mean, that's forced. So you look at, I mean, I had some of our good friends, right? They were going to add on to their house. They got a quote. It was going to be $45,000 or something like that, 40, whatever. Guy comes back. They had it all set up. I mean, approved, everything good to go. Guy comes back like a month later and says the quote's now 93. They couldn't do it. They had to cancel it. They literally could not add on to their house. And the guy was like forced. And you got to think, you know, on some of those contractors, I mean, it's all about relationships. Well, they don't want to do that, but they have to. I mean, he had no other choice but to do that because his quote was so skewed from everything that happened.
And I mean, I'd say right now, the thing everybody has to keep in mind, we've got almost like a 3-way perfect storm right now from a pricing standpoint. You've got essentially steel prices through the roof. And I mean, steel goes up, that goes into literally every product you have, right? You've got finally, for the first time in about a decade, farm prices up. Because I mean, farmers, I come from a farm town in Northwest Ohio. Farmers have been crushed since the latter part of 2014, up until really getting into the other side of the pandemic in late 2020. So you've got farm products are much more expensive. That makes all our food more expensive. And then you have oil prices up because demand has increased much more rapidly than supply. And our friends in the Middle East have no intention of increasing output too rapidly because their government budgets are a linear function of how much they can charge for oil. And there's no way fracking in the US we're not essentially the swing producer, as they call it, because it still takes too long. So you combine those 3 forces together: elevated farm prices, elevated steel prices, lumber's come down from its highs. I think a lot of that was a speculative bubble that people got themselves into. You combine steel, farm products, and oil, you've got a rough recipe.
Quick question. Being here in Indiana, and you're from Hicksville, so you get this, but it's kind of a big thing around here, is when farmers were struggling like that, and a lot of them now, and it's like kind of a debate because like some of the old school guys don't like it, but are using a lot of their land for solar panel fields. Like they're like the amount of solar panels that are being put in the fields now instead of actual crops. And it's a big thing, you know, it's like, oh, you know, that's not real farming. They're like, well, you know, if I can't make money, I got to do what I got to do, you know, on my land, you know, to make money. And that's just becoming like a huge thing. Have you seen anything with that, or is that diving a little too deep? But I've just locally here, that's kind of become a big thing.
I haven't seen any of that up in Michigan, but I mean, we're not the farming powerhouse when it comes to, you know, cash crops in comparison. I mean, we got a lot more truck farming up here and things of that sort. But, you know, the one good thing, though, when farmers do well, they buy a lot of machinery. And I'll tell you what, the John Deeres of the world and the Caterpillars of the world will definitely be looking forward to that. I mean, I always tell people, the most machinery this country ever made was in 2012 of all years, right? Why? Farmers are doing great and we were fracking a lot. And so that's something that, you know, is thinking about how's this going to affect, you know, all the other aspects of the supply chain. For the flatbed carriers out there that haul steel, cheer for high crop prices, because that's just going to mean a lot more steel coils heading into John Deere to get turned into combines.
Absolutely. I came from the steel industry in my background. I hauled steel all over the place, all over the Midwest. I'm familiar with your neighborhood and where you grew up. And, I'm in South Bend, so I've been all over Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, Wisconsin, Illinois with steel in my when I was driving, I was hauling steel mostly. So that's absolutely true. And the stuff that it goes into, it's crazy the amount of stuff that they're stealing plastic parts. They're stealing. It was eye opening how big the steel industry really is, and some of those mills that just own everything everywhere. The whole steel is its own supply chain. It's a behemoth all by itself.
And one thing I tell everybody to keep in mind too is the US, we still produce at least 75% of the steel we consume is made domestically. The big story with steel over the years isn't that we've stopped producing it. We produce millions of tons of steel a year. The story is we're just so much more efficient than we were in the 1960s. We used to employ over 500,000 production workers at steel mills. Now it's 80,000. We make darn near the same amount of steel with essentially a seventh of the labor force today. Right.
Which leads to huge margins. And then that doesn't go away when you're publicly traded. Otherwise you do.
Exactly.
Like Nucor is this area, the building structures too. I mean, just the amount of buildings that are going up, warehousing and all that. I mean, it's huge. It's huge. And those safety measures back then, there were no safety measures, right? You had everybody down in the trenches. Can't do that.
No, I think we lost you, TJ. You're cutting out. That's all right. We'll move on. What do you, hey, Jason, I mean, I know you've got all the data and the great points. Will kind of already asked what you were seeing as what is the thing that you're looking at that we're not seeing? What is like your gut instinct as to like, not the end of the year, because we can all see that it's about 6 weeks, but what are you seeing at Q1? What do we do in the next 6 months? What do we do in the next 3 or 4 months?
So at least for me, I think I've been on record. I'll go on record saying it again. I think towards the end of Q2 of next year, things will start to feel a lot more normal. Hopefully COVID is pretty much under control at that point through vaccination or exposure. The chip shortage should be starting to work itself out more and more. We're starting to see some evidence of that. If we get the typical downtime in February and March due to the Tet holiday, the Chinese New Year holiday, the ports should start getting themselves dug out. So I really think it'll start to feel a little bit more normal. I mean, with the infrastructure package going into effect, I mean, demand is going to stay robust. I mean, I have zero concern about us going into a recession. I mean, that's not my concern. The biggest wild card that I have is going to be how bad inflation is. And again, I think for the next several months, it is going to be kind of rough. But the biggest commodity I'm really watching is steel. If there's one area I'm really focusing on, it's what is domestic U.S. steel prices. Because if we start to see that really turn down, that'll be a pretty good indicative sign. But so I think for me that within about 7 or 8 months, I think it's going to feel a lot more normal. Consumer spending should have sort of stabilized. I think Q1 or 2021 will have seen just record consumer buying of durable goods because of the stimulus money. So, I mean, I think 2022 is going to be a less volatile year than 2021, barring, again, some cataclysm like a vaccine-resistant variant of COVID emerging. I mean, that's to me the wild card right now is, do you have a vaccine-resistant variant emerge? And if that happens, well, I have no idea.
Well, yeah, I mean, there could be another COVID tomorrow too. So I don't know. But you predicting with your data and your background, you predicting stability. Man, I knew I loved you.
Well, I'm predicting more stability than right now. I mean, again, the one thing I can say for at least trucking companies, we're not going to see rates nosedive like they did in 19 in the latter part of 18. The structure isn't there to see that happen. I do see there be some move to normalization. I mean, spot prices can't keep staying at record levels. They are going to come down at some point here. I think the biggest danger the trucking sector has is we take the shortage arguments too severely, and people think there's not nearly enough capacity, and we see carriers overshoot just like they did in 18. That to me is the biggest concern I have, is that we didn't learn our lesson before, and we overshoot the amount of supply that we need again. Because every time we keep saying there's, anytime somebody says there's a driver shortage, what happens? Folks who are reading that in the Washington Post or in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, they may be saying, hey, maybe I should go become a trucker. And we basically create a self-fulfilling prophecy within the sector. And so I think that's the biggest concern that we have.
I think
So
we're guaranteed to repeat that cycle. You might as well write it. Just write it down. It's guaranteed.
You don't see a driver shortage? Is that what you're saying?
Me?
I just don't. I don't see the data being there to support it.
I'm with you.
It's funny. We talked about this earlier. I've got a buddy that has a company based in Florida. They haul a bunch of regional stuff, and they've got about 150 trucks. And he's like, man, I don't have a driver shortage. I can hire drivers tomorrow. I can't get my hands on trailers. I can't get my hands on trucks. So any used piece of equipment that is useful, I buy it. And there's a lot of compounding issues that are culminating in the challenges that we're seeing. But I think you can almost write in stone that we're going to see, whenever it happens, a dramatic drop. It won't be anytime soon, but I don't think that, and it's kind of weird. So in transportation, we ride this roller coaster, right? This up and down, it's up and down, it's up and down. And currently customers or shippers are trying to figure out why everything's so expensive. God, gosh, right? Why are prices so high? And so you keep telling them the same thing. So what's going on, supply and demand, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to flip, right? And they're going to drive rates to the floor. Like literally, they will be embarrassingly low. And
not just because of like recovering or anything, because they've right now they have to find ways to be more efficient, and they have to find ways to drive rates down. So when the bubble, like you said, when it turns back down, they're already going to have those in place that they didn't have before.
Yeah, they're going to be embarrassingly low. And then carriers are going to say the same thing they were saying in March. Someone needs to regulate these cheap rates. How can we be allowed to do this while for the last 18, 24 months, we are getting hammered for pricing, right? Rates are obscenely high. And so I think it is a good point or time for us to start thinking about, okay, what do you do to make things more equitable? Because my best carrier partners charge me fair rates all the time, and I pay them fair rates. And so they're not obscenely high. They're fair market rates, lower than what I would get going to market with a carrier that I don't work with. And my best customers give me the rates that are fair for the market. And then when it flips, they ask what's necessary for us to continue to be able to run the business, but they don't drive my rate to the ground. There's outliers on both ends of that. And we have to be able to find some equilibrium for the industry to have any sort of normalcy. But it will continue to do this because of that.
That's all conversations. I've been preaching that. Remember back when it was like a thing? It still kind of is, where you find all those graveyard trailers, those Schneider trailers, just sitting around rusting, because they were one of the first ones to really go out and spend the money on trailers and drop. Right now, obviously, equipment was huge. Hey, when there's issues, there's potential, there's opportunity. When I was running the fleet, it was like, hey, I'm going to sell the fact we got drop trailers. They can't find warehousing. They can't get it moved. They got to use my trailer as storage. I don't care, but you got to give me freight, right? And a lot of people need it for that. And having the conversations, every time I have a conversation, it's like, this is where I got to be at. My job is to work these rates down. This is where the market's at. But when this market turns, I am willing to sit down and have the same conversation with you again about readjusting rates. And the big problem with this industry, especially when it's booming and we're hiring so many people in, is they're not doing that. Sales guy gets in, gets the account in, sends it over to operations, they work it, that's it. And, the entry level people work it, and then when things turn, they start pruning, right? They start pruning people, or they just, start driving the rates down, and there's no relationship there. There's no conversation happening now because, that wasn't established ahead of time. So with issues come opportunity. And if you don't have that established, you're gonna get burned.
That's always the wrap up. Hey, a bunch of us have got to cut off here at hard stop 7:15. We got about a minute left, but Jason, thank you again so much for coming on here. I don't know, I speak for all of us. We're all big fans of your data. Keep cranking it out because it's very enjoyable. I find this type of stuff fun on the weekend to go through and stuff. Maybe I picked the wrong field, but I really enjoy your content. I love what you're putting out. Keep it coming, man. If you guys aren't out there following Jason on LinkedIn, follow him. He's got more data and actual usable info than anybody else I've seen.
And what was the couple tips, right? Was number one, no driver shortage, which I thought was cool. Number two, what was it? Follow steel prices.
Yep, follow steel, no driver shortage, and I'd say right now, look at auto production. That's going to be a good canary in the coal mine if supply chain issues are starting to get worked out.
There you go. And sometimes it just takes a couple things like that to just be more proactive and just build off that. Start diving in and learn from guys like Jason, learn from other people, and